This is Damon Fordham, adjunct professor of history at Charleston Southern University and the Citadel here in Charleston, South Carolina. And this evening I'm going to talk to you about a very little known subject, the lost book of African wisdom. Now, some of you might be saying, lost book of African wisdom? Yeah, believe it or not, before the arrival of the Europeans, there was such a thing as written literature in Africa. You had, of course, the hieroglyphics of the Egyptians in the northeastern part of Africa, but you also had the writings of the Ethiopians in a language called Ge'ez in further in East Africa. But believe it or not, in West Africa, which is often the source of where many of today's African Americans were descended, there was a history of literature. You see, there were largely an oral people who passed stories down through a group of people called the griots, who were the storytellers. But in 1076, there was an Arabic tribe called the Almoravids that invaded the upper western coast of Africa and brought the Muslim religion to them. And with the Muslim religion came the writings of Arabic and the Quran. And they actually had schools in West Africa where they learned the Quran and the Arabic language, the Quran being the holy book of Muslims, and you had a considerable literature there. This was before the arrival of the Europeans. Now, to break down the story a little bit, here's a little bit of background here, okay? Now, in Mali, West Africa, it was a part of a series of kingdoms in the medieval period from about the 1200 AD up to about 1591. First there was the Mali Empire, and then there was the Songhay Empire. And they had these powerful kings and great rulers and all of that. And there came a time when you had this literature in a place like Janneh and Timbuktu and Mali, and they produced some spectacular literature out of their schools. And one such book was written around about 1613 or so, and it was a book called the Tarikh Al Sudan. It was written by a guy by the name of Abdul Rahman Al Sadi. And there was another book around the same time that was called the Tarikh Al Fatash, which was written by a fellow by the name of Mahmud Kati. All right? But now a little bit more about this Tarikh Al Sudan in there, all right? Now, what happened essentially was that this great civilization, this Songhay civilization, in about 1591, they were conquered by the Moroccans. And as a result of that, many of the great scholars of that period were either arrested or killed. Of course, you cut off the head and the body dies. So, seeing all this happen, this Abdul Rahman Al Sadi decided that he was going to preserve the wisdom of his people in writing a book. And this is what he had to say about this in the year 1613. Listen very carefully here. To proceed, we understood that our forefathers used mainly to divert one another in their assemblies by talking about the holy folk. May God be pleased with them, and have mercy upon them. Then they would speak of the chiefs and kings of their lands, and their lives, and their deaths, and their conduct, their heroic exploits, and other historical information and tales relating to them. This is what they most delighted in telling, and what they most desired to speak of among themselves. Get this, folks. Then that generation passed away. May the mercy of God Most High be upon them. In the following generation, there was none that had any interest in that, nor was there anyone who followed the path of their deceased ancestors, nor anyone greatly concerned about respect for elders. If there were indeed any such, then they were few. And finally, the only folk remaining were those whose motivations were base, and who concerned themselves with hatred, jealousy, backbiting, scandal-mongering, and concocting lies about people. God preserve us from such things, for they lead to evil consequences. Now when I saw that branch of learning fading away and disappearing, and its coinage being debased though recognizing it to be of great benefit, and to contain many gems of wisdom, since it instructs a man about his native land and his ancestors and their differing generations, their chronologies, and the dates of their decease, I sought the help of God, sublime as he, in recording the stories and historical traditions that have been handed down about the kings of the Songhay folk, their conduct and their military exploits, recounting the foundation of Timbuktu and the kings who ruled it and some of the scholars and holy folk. I now proceed seeking help from God Most High, which suffices me, and who is the finest protector. Think of the conditions that he described as he saw his empire fading away. And think of any similarities. I'll just put it to you that way. 6 years after Rahman Al Sadi wrote this in 1613 was when they recorded the Africans landing at Jamestown in 1619. Think about that for a minute, folks. So what happened was that this culture of learning eventually faded away that he wanted to chronicle. And this Tarikh Al Sudan passed down in secret through many generations until 1853, a German found a copy of it while exploring there. And then in 1896, a Frenchman named Abdul Rahman, I hope I'm saying that right, translated into French. And then there was Dr. John O. Hunwick at Northwestern University up in Chicago. And he found a copy of it, and he was the first to translate it in English into Timbuktu in the Songhay Empire before he died in 2015. And this Timbuktu of the Songhay Empire is a fascinating chronicle written in 1613 about the history of the great kings of West Africa, such as Mansa Musa and Sunni Ali and Askia Muhammad, down to the time of the Moroccan invasion. And so now that this book has been translated, these stories have been preserved in this Timbuktu in the Songhay Empire. So anybody who thinks that African history was nothing but bush and jungle and all of that kind of thing, you can learn from the wisdom that he preserved and what he had to say and think about it, and hopefully it'll inspire you to do great things. This is Damon Fordham talking about the lost book of African wisdom.